In the last lecture module, we rehearsed the foundationalist regress argument. We spelled out each of the mutually exclusive and jointly exhaustive set of possible ways that the regress could resolve itself. We saw how the foundationalist rules out the first, then the second, then the third, leaving only one possibility remaining. We were about to pop the logical champagne when Sosa bursts in and harshes our buzz and says, no, you haven't established that conclusion because you actually haven't been able to rule out the possibility of infinite justificational regresses. So what we're going to do in this module is we're going to rehearse those arguments. Now, I have to be upfront about this. This is my least favorite part of this paper. I think it pretty much represents a lot of the things that philosophers do that are terrible. I'll try and be as constructive and message disciplined as possible. Look at the response to each argument to rule out infinite regresses. If you're getting confused, just stop listening to me. The final punchline of this module is the first slide where there isn't a dead crow. So Sosa says, look, I'll take on all comers. I'll show you. You can't give me an argument that there's no infinite justificational regresses. Psychologist comes in. Look, it's humanly impossible to have an infinite number of beliefs. Sosa, A, who knows how many beliefs we have? Actually, if we allow unconscious and dispositional beliefs, we could have an infinite number of beliefs. Point one. Point two. We can adopt a methodological approach and claim that the question isn't restricted to human understanding. Let's deal with B first. Premise one of our argument is I, a human being, have a belief that all crows are black. That belief is justified. Any story that you tell about how the epistemic regress resolves itself has to apply to me. Who knows what God knows? It's not my business right now. I want to understand human understanding, so I can't just rule it out. B strikes me as a non-starter. A, who knows how many beliefs we have, especially if we allow unconscious or dispositional beliefs. That's just false. I'm a physical system with a physical capacity. Everyone is. Average human brain, about 100 billion brain cells. Let's be generous, 120 billion brain cells. Each brain cell represents a belief. I'm at 120 billion beliefs, far above any psychologist or cognitive scientist estimate. Still woefully short of an infinite number. Okay, well, fine, there's all the interconnections. Suppose every interconnection between my neurons can represent a belief all by itself, and let's say that raises it up 100 times. So 120 billion to the 100th power. That's huge. Much, much bigger than any estimate about how many beliefs I have, unconscious, dispositional, or otherwise, still not infinite. I'm a physical system with a limited physical capacity. End of story. That was just a terrible response. Physicist comes in. Hey, there can be no infinite regresses of justification, since such a regress would never end, and hence it would never justify any belief. Sosa's response. If the end is temporal, but why must there be a temporal end? If the end is justificational, then aren't you simply begging the question? Premise one. I have a belief that all crows are black. That belief is justified. I'm a finite being. I have a finite capacity to form and retain memories. I have a finite lifetime in which I could justify any belief that I have. The answer that you have to give me about how that belief gets justified has to be within the confines of my relatively short temporal existence. If it doesn't, I don't know what story you're telling me. I justify beliefs in this atemporal nexus that exists before and after I do, and somehow that helps me. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Seems like a terrible, terrible story there. What if the end is justificational? It's an infinite regress. There is no end. So, end of story? This sounds like something Carl Sagan would have said on Cosmos when I was a kid. Billions and billions of beliefs. So if one supposes that one must have a belief that the target belief is justified by the prior belief, and that that belief is justified by the prior belief, and so on and so on and so on, this sounds very Cartesian, then I'd have to have a belief in an infinite proposition. I'm sympathetic to the first part of this response. Why would you suppose that? Well, if you're somebody like Descartes or Bonjour, you have to actually have cognitive penetration of the relationships. That might be why. Second part of the response. Even if it were true, it only implies that one have an infinity of increasingly complex finite beliefs. Footnote back to the first objection. I'm a finite creature with a finite capacity to form beliefs. Doesn't work. Finally, number 4. We can imagine infinite regresses in which each belief seems to be justified by the next, but it's obvious that the belief never gets justified. This is an interesting and important point. Infinite regresses have the potential to make justification trivial. It's the sort of little Johnny eat candy justification, right? Johnny, why do you believe you should be able to eat that piece of candy? Because I do. Yes, but why do you believe you're justified in believing that you should eat that piece of candy? Because I do. But why do you? And so on. He's always got an answer. The answer never seems to get you any justificational traction, and it goes on forever. That seems like a real possibility with infinite regresses. Sosa seems to acknowledge that such beliefs are not justified, since in these cases, a belief is merely one which would be justified if its predecessors were true. Here's the problem. That's true of every infinite justification regress. They're all like that. So what you've got to be able to tell me is, A, can I actually know if a regress is infinite? Can I prove that there are infinite regresses? The answer to that question is emphatically no. I can never prove that I'm in an infinite regress. You can easily adapt Torrey's halting problem to demonstrate this. It doesn't work. Can I effectivize justification so that I at least know that I'm getting justification? The answer, again, no. Why? Mathematical induction works in the opposite direction. How did I generate an inductive or a recursive definition of the natural numbers? Base clause. This one has that property. Recursive clause. If something has that property, apply this operation, you generate the next member of that series. It also has that property. I do it over and over and over again. 1's a natural number. 1 plus 1 is 2. That's a natural number. 2 plus 1 is 3. That's a natural number. And so on. So if I start with justification and I perform the operations, then I can effectivize my checking to see if justification is going through. I'm in the opposite case with the justificational regress. I start with the belief. I believe it's justified, but it's not by definition justified. So what do? I go back and I look at this belief. I believe that's justified, but it's not by definition justified. So what do? I go back. Each step back doesn't answer the question. There is no effective procedure for checking to see if justification is being transferred. There is no effective procedure to see if I'm in an infinite regress. And so this is really a completely moot point. Even as a novice like myself, consider mathematical induction for a moment. You realize this is pointless. We can't do this. There is no positive reason to suppose there are infinite justificational regresses. Here's the horrible part. It was never about that. The real point, and I'm projecting maybe onto Sosa here, the real point of this whole exercise was this. The regress argument is actually a cheat. It doesn't actually prove that the basic or intrinsically justified beliefs get their justification basically or intrinsically. It just proves there has to be them. It doesn't explain why or how. It doesn't help us understand how justification gets injected into the belief edifice to begin with at all. It sidesteps that whole issue. It tries to sidestep that issue by showing it's the only viable possibility. So it's a cheat. It doesn't really help us understand epistemic justification at all. It just maybe, if it's successful, shows us that it's possible. And here's how I project that into Sosa. If the foundationalists cannot rule out the possibility of legitimate infinite regresses of justification, then such a possibility effectively blocks the regress argument. Notice how that seems weird, right? I'm trying to prove the existence of intrinsically justified beliefs, and this other thing that I can't disprove somehow prevents me from doing that, and it's not about this at all. That's how you know it's a cheat. However, the foundationalists need only claim that all justified beliefs are at the heads of terminating regresses of justification, a weaker claim, since they could also be at the head of infinite regresses. Actually, it's not a weaker claim. It's the real work that needs to be done. You need to tell me how it's possible that a belief could be justified in and of itself. Until you do that, you can't actually fulfill the promise of that last sentence. You have to actually tell me how it's possible for a belief to be intrinsically justified. That's the hard work. That's the work that gets you some understanding. The regress argument tries to make a quick-witted dodge of the real work and instead prove things indirectly. That, I think, is the whole point of this. Infinite regress is red herring.